We're fortunate to have Dr. Joe Dispenza back with us once again, and today we'll be speaking about the mystery of the placebo effect and much more. The new thinking on the placebo effect is not to dismiss it as a random event, rather to look into the depths of what's at work when the mind is engaged to believe in a healthy outcome. Dr. Joe will explain the latest science on the phenomena and deeper questions surrounding it, such as, why do we need to take the medicine when the mind can create the healing effect? And I think a lot of people are interested in this. And thank you for joining us again.
Happy to be with you, Regina.
You're a little ray of sunshine when you enter the building. Everybody's chirping. So let's talk about something that is probably dogging most people. I'm always, I think, kind of amazed out and about and speaking with friends how much genuine suffering there is in the world among people who would seemingly have no reason to perceive their life as suffering. And when you look at it from a mind/brain perspective, what would you say is the greatest impetus for all the suffering that's happening among otherwise seemingly healthy and prosperous people and not?
I think it's a great conversation to have. I think a lot of people confuse pleasure with joy. And so we have, stressors in our life, and we experience frustration and impatience, and we suffer from conditions in our world. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's healthy that we can pay attention to how we're feeling. The problem, I think, is that when we react to something and we keep those chemicals going for an extended period of time, then we start to memorize those emotional states. And so when we get to that point, we start viewing our life through the lens of that emotion. And for the most part, an emotion is a record of the past. So we're really viewing our life through the lens of the past. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because the moment we're viewing our life from the lens of the past, we're always going to try to anticipate a future worst case scenario based on the past.
Worst case scenario.
Of course, so you got to be prepared and protect yourself for what's going to go wrong. And when we do that, we basically pick a potential in the quantum field that's a known. We focus on that experience to the exclusion of everything else. The thought in our mind literally becomes the experience, and then we emotionally begin to embrace the event before it takes place, and our body physiologically begins to respond as if it's in that future event. To the body, it's experiencing the event. And the body, as the unconscious mind, gets the rush of those chemicals, and so in time, we condition the body to live in that state of suffering or that state of anticipation or dread. And the long-term effects of that then is predicting the future based on the past, is that we're never in the present moment, and that kind of torment to the body is difficult. So then when that occurs then, and if we get it right, we pat ourselves on the shoulder and we say, God, look at me, how smart I am. You need to hang out with me. But when we don't get it right, we wind up in trouble, and we start experiencing the vigilance and the discomfort and the pain that goes along with it. And then we look outside of ourselves to find a way to change that feeling inside of us. So, we'll use alcohol or drugs or whatever to try to sedate or to medicate to reduce that feeling. Or by the same means, if we're thinking continuously about our past, in time, we begin to teach the body emotionally to live in the past. And the body, as the unconscious mind, emotionally is living in the past. So then the same exact phenomenon happens, because when we think about our problems, we're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as the event is taking place. So if you look at a functional brain scan of anxiety and depression, they look exactly the same. Anxiety is looking to the future, and depression is looking to the past. And most people who have anxiety do have depression. So then, now when we get to that state, we tend to complain about our problems. We tend to get frustrated and talk about them. And when we do that, then we're conditioning the body, we're enslaving the body into those chemicals of suffering, or those chemicals of complaining, of blaming, of making excuses, feeling sorry for ourselves. And that unconscious process then is literally an addiction to the body. So then we were talking about this when we were having a cup of coffee, and that addiction then is something that you cannot stop. So the body then gets tormented into these chemicals of victimization, and it becomes the person's state of being. So then when it comes time to change, and you have to no longer think that way, no longer behave that way, no longer feel that way, you're stepping into that river of change. And the hardest part about that is not making the same choice.
Exactly. When you're talking about that, I'm thinking of Don Miguel Ruiz and his book, I think it was The Voice of Knowledge, but he was talking about how your life is your canvas. You can paint it however you wish. Well, once you start getting the subconscious programming going, the computer program, the software that's been programmed for this same pattern of thought over and over, really, what are you doing except adding more paint on the same weary old image?
Yeah, but it's an unconscious process.
It's an unconscious
process. People say to me,
yeah.
"Oh, I'm fasting from, sugar, or I'm not eating chocolate, or I'm not eating any white foods," or you know what I tell them? I said, "You really want to go on a fast? Fast from complaining, fast from guilt, fast from suffering. Try that and give your body a break from those chemicals. And when your body is no longer getting that emotional rush, the body is going to be just like an addict breaking the addiction. It's going to want you to complain and blame it. It's going to bring up scenes from your past just so the body as the mind can reaffirm that identity. And stepping into that river of change, and no longer, becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, becoming aware of your habits and behaviors, paying attention and reserving your feelings. When you do that and you step into that river of change, you got to go from the old self to the new self, and crossing that river is the biological, the neurological, the genetic, the chemical death of the old self. And most people don't want to cross that river because the moment they feel uncomfortable, they're feeling unfamiliar.
Well, isn't it a matter of discipline as well? I mean, don't you have to create interrupters in the thought pattern? And when you notice, if you're mindful enough to see, oh, there I'm doing it again. I mean, isn't it beneficial to just interrupt that and not let that keep playing?
Yeah, that's one way. I mean, by you interrupting the process, nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together.
Right.
Your conscious volition means when you're observing the thought or paying attention to the thought, it means you're no longer the program.
Right.
You're now the consciousness observing the program, and you begin to objectify your subjective self. That process of self-observation allows us to modify our behaviors to do a better job in life, and that's neuroplasticity. And because of the size of the frontal lobe, that forebrain, that mechanism of metacognition, allows us to think about how we're thinking. That's so we can really modify who we are.
So does a person not have the choice, even though we're in these unconscious programs, to say, okay, from this point forward, I am going to create a change in that program. I don't wish to live like that any longer. By simple will and discipline, can you choose to become the observer? Or is this something that has to happen on another level first?
Well, if you think about breaking an addiction to, say, something like chocolate, okay, we'll just use this as an example. If you're addicted to chocolate and I slid a chocolate cake in front of you, the moment you saw that chocolate cake, your brain would start saying, oh my God, I want a piece of chocolate. Everybody else is eating chocolate. It's not that bad for you. I can start tomorrow. And your body would automatically, physiologically respond in the presence of that chocolate cake without your conscious mind. In other words, if you're addicted, it's going to happen automatically. So then, if you broke the addiction to the chocolate cake, literally did not have any addiction any longer, if I slid that chocolate cake in front of you, you could eat it or not eat it, and you would have no response, okay? In other words, you would have no physiological... Your conscious mind and your subconscious mind would really be working together. But when you're addicted, your body has become the mind, and your body is overriding the conscious brain, right?
So you're saying you can't zing in an observer type of consciousness, or you can?
Oh, you can. Will is one of the mechanisms that allows us to do that. But if you're addicted to certain emotions in your life, I don't know, guilt or shame or unworthiness or insecurity or rage or frustration, then by definition of a quantum model, we use the people and conditions in our life to reaffirm our emotional addictions so that we can remember who we are as a somebody. So then when people go with their conscious will, like they make a declaration, I'm going to be no longer a victim today, I'm going to live in a state of grace, they start out with really good intentions, but remember, if the body's become the mind and it's not getting its emotional addiction, the body's going to send signals to the brain, and then you walk back into your life and you see the person that you use to reaffirm your guilt or your frustration, just like being in the presence of the chocolate cake. The moment you see that person, if you're addicted to that emotion and you're using them to reaffirm it, just like being in the presence of the chocolate cake, your body's going to physiologically, automatically, subconsciously return back to the old chemical self. In other words, you're going to go unconscious. So it takes an act of willfulness to make the choice. And as we talk in a little bit, when we make a choice to change, we have to make a choice that has such an amplitude or intensity of energy that the amplitude of choice becomes the experience that literally begins to be greater than the hardwired programs in the brain and the emotional addictions in the body, and the body has to respond to a new mind. In other words, the hair on the back of your neck has to stand up, and the body, as the animal, has to say, uh-oh, she's serious this time. It's not you sitting on the couch with your smartphone here and your computer here and your remote control and your, I think I'm going to change tomorrow. The body's like, relax, she's lying to herself again. Nothing's going to change. So the active willfulness is one component. But what our research shows is that where the programs exist, they exist in the subconscious, right? And it's in the body-mind. So then the purpose of meditation, as we talked about last time, is to get beyond the conscious mind, past the analytical mind, into the subconscious mind where those programs exist. And that's the purpose of meditation, to get beyond the analytical mind. Now you're in the operating system. And so as you become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, as you begin to pay attention to your behaviors and notice your emotions, you're actually going into the operating system and bringing them to your conscious awareness. Why? Because you don't want those to slip by your awareness ever again. So then when you begin to decide then how you do on a program, and you begin to teach your body emotionally what wealth feels like, what freedom feels like, what nobility is like, when you begin to plan your behaviors in your day, the act of rehearsing who you're going to be installs the neurological circuits in your brain. You're priming your brain so you have something to use when you open your eyes. When you begin to think about what thoughts you do want to think about and fire and wire in your brain, how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality, and your personality creates your personal reality. Now, your job is to get up from your meditation differently than when you sat down, and you have to be in a new state of being, so that when you walk back into your life and you've overcome your guilt or you've overcome your frustration, and the body's no longer living in the past, it's now living in the future. The moment that happens, you can walk in the presence of your greatest adversary, your greatest enemy, the person you used to reaffirm your addiction, and you have no physiological response anymore because you did the work to overcome yourself. So I think it takes both. I think it takes the act of volition, the will,
the choice, the will, and the meditation.
And then it takes going inward then and making that process of retiring the old self and beginning to reinvent a new self. And that's what our research shows.
Absolutely. And and we're going to get to some of that research in a little bit, but you mentioned a little bit ago we go unconscious again, and this is a process we constantly do. We can do all of the things you just mentioned, for example, but it seems that the default program is to go back into this unconscious state. And we just barely touched on it in our last interview. Why is that?
Well, 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, attitudes that function subconsciously like an automatic program. I mean, literally, the body has been conditioned to be the mind. So if 95% of who you are by the time you're 35 years old is redundant autopilot behaviors, that's what a habit is, and you walk into your life and you're going to try to change and use the 5% of your conscious mind, and there's no emotional quotient to really teach the body, then the moment you have a stray thought or the moment you react to something in your life, you just press play. You just pressed the program, and it's going to run. And
just like a computer program.
Just like a computer program. So you may, have 2 glasses of wine and we'll be walking home and you need money and you go to your ATM machine and you look at the ATM numbers and you're like, I can't remember my numbers. But you walk over and you look at the keypad and all of a sudden your fingers dial the number. Well, how did you do that? You couldn't consciously remember it, but you practiced it so many times that your body knew better than your brain. That's who we are.
Yes.
So there's a program to brush your teeth, there's a program to comb your hair, there's a program to drive a car, there's a program to speak a language, there's a program to complain, there's a program to judge others, there's a program to push to the front of the line, there's a program to compete. That's the culture. So then you put yourself in the culture where all of that's normal and acceptable and everybody else is doing it, and the current's going this way, and you're trying to swim upstream then. It takes a certain amount of awareness then to go against what
to delete that file.
And to go against what feels so natural. Like, this is so unnatural. Well, that's my definition of genius, being uncomfortable and being okay with it. When I'm uncomfortable and okay with it, I know I'm crossing the river of change, and when you're crossing that river, most people say, I can't predict my future because they can't predict their guilt or their frustration. But the best way to predict your future when you're in that unknown is to create it. Now's the time. You're in fertile ground. You're in the uncertainty principle. You're in the unknown. That's where all possibility exists. So right outside of our comfort zone, right outside of that known, right outside of that comfort zone is where the magic happens. So we have to teach people to become comfortable in that void.
Absolutely.
And when they're comfortable in that void, then they're in the place where, oh gosh, now I'm in the unknown. And so you and I have been hypnotized and conditioned to believing that the unknown is bad. And if you're living by the hormones of stress, if you're living by aggression and anger and war and frustration and hatred and all of those, fear and anxiety and sadness and guilt and shame, the unknown is a scary place, and there's better chances in survival in antiquity from running from the unknown. So if you're living by a lower denominator of those survival emotions, then everybody will always cling to the known. So then tell me, how does the new experience happen? So then when we break the addictions to those emotions, then when you truly free yourself from the chains of the past and the body liberates energy and you feel lifted and joyful and inspired and you're seeing a whole new landscape, a whole new horizon, that creative state, then now you're going to select an unknown, and the unknown is going to become an adventure. Now that concept of stepping out into the unknown and trusting yourself, trusting in possibility, trusting in the unknown, that's the natural state of being. But if you watch enough news and you're conditioned that you need a certain hairstyle or a certain look and to look, anemic and underweight and emaciated, and that's beauty, and everybody else is trying to do the same, chasing false ideals or macho or whatever people, how we're being conditioned. To go against that really then means that you have to learn a bit of knowledge about yourself and the true nature of who we are. That we are greater, we're other than our body, we're greater than our environment, and we live beyond time. And when you get to that point to understand that you're a consciousness now, using the brain and body to create different levels of mind to experience the canvas of life, then you start to ask yourself then, there's got to be more. Who am I? Why am I doing this? What is our meaning in life? Those fundamental questions are when the soul begins to wake up.
And all of this extends into the physical also when you're talking about these wired programs we've created with, as you say, anxiety or hatred, self-loathing and so forth. This all has a direct impact on the physiology of the body as well.
Absolutely. And look, there's no scientist that would disagree that the long-term effects of these chemicals dysregulate and downregulate genes and create disease. It's a scientific fact that the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease, because no organism in nature can live in emergency mode all the time. So if you're anticipating some worst case scenario or remembering some event from your past, worry or suffering or whatever, then you're turning on the stress response just by thought alone. And if those chemicals of stress are highly addictive, you become addictive to your thoughts. So then if you're addicted to your thoughts and those thoughts can make you sick, the question is, can your thoughts make you well? So then what is the physiology and the mechanism of how that happens?
So let's go into beliefs, perceptions, and morphogenetic fields and Rupert Sheldrake's words.
Well, let's talk about it, because where do our thoughts and feelings come from? Our thoughts and feelings come from our memories. Our thoughts and feelings come from the things we're exposed to in terms of knowledge and the experiences that we have in our life. So when you have an experience or you learn something new, your brain begins to physically change, and you wire that in your brain. You have new circuits to reflect that event. So there's a fingerprint or a footprint in your brain. When you have an experience and the experience produces an emotional quotient, that's what experiences do. They have a residue of emotion. Emotions are the end product of experience. Then how you think and how you feel, for the most part, is a record of your past. And your brain is an artifact of the past. It is a reflection of everything you've been exposed to in your environment. And your body, if you're living by the same emotion, and those thoughts are driving the emotions, and the emotions are driving the thoughts, and the thoughts are driving the emotions, then your body, as the unconscious mind, is believing it's in the past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. To the body, it's literally living in the past. So now, if our thoughts and feelings then are a record of the past, and you take a series of thoughts and you connect a thought to a feeling, 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 that's called an attitude. So you have a series of good thoughts that are connected to a series of good feelings. You say, I have a pretty good attitude, And if you have a series of negative thoughts that are connected to some negative feelings, you would say I have a pretty bad attitude. Now, how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. Thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. You got it? So now, if you take an attitude, an attitude, an attitude, and you string a series of attitudes together, that's called a belief. And a belief is just an extended state of being. So if an attitude is a shortened state of being and a belief is an elongated state of being, we could say then that a belief is a thought you keep thinking over and over again until you fire and wire it in your brain, and it has a component of emotion that then begins to condition the body into believing it's true. So then, if you keep thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking in the same way, and you condition your body to be the mind of that state of being, an unconscious process, then a belief is an unconscious state of being. So we have beliefs about money, we have beliefs about spirituality, we have beliefs about relationships, we have beliefs about drugs and pills and medicine, we have beliefs about governments, we have beliefs about everything. Weight, it's all diet, it's all beliefs. So then a belief is an extended state of being that becomes an unconscious process because the body has been hardwired neurologically and emotionally conditioned. So the boundaries of our beliefs then become the way we feel about things. So when you're exposed to a new belief and it's outside of your emotional acceptance, that's the moment people say, I don't believe it, this doesn't feel right to me.
It meets resistance.
Right, so then if you take a belief and you string beliefs together, that's called a perception. And a perception has everything to do with the relationships you have, the choices you make, the things you create, and the behaviors that you demonstrate. So then in order to change your beliefs and perceptions about yourself in your life, you have to change your state of being. And in order to change your state of being, you have to make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries an emotional quotient or a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in your brain and the emotional conditioning of your body or addiction of your body. And your body literally responds to a new mind. In other words, how can a person in a state of religious ecstasy drink strychnine and have no biological effects? They make a decision to change their state of being, and it's energy that does that. It's electromagnetism. They're not saying, geez, I wonder if this is poison.
Right.
The moment they're in that state, they're in a limited state of being. They're more matter and less energy.
Right.
How can a person in a state of absolute faith chew on glass and have no biological effects? Their decision in that moment transcends their biology. It transcends their circuitry. It transcends their genetics. In that moment, they're out of time. A person who takes a poisonous snake in a state of absolute certainty and allows the poisonous snake to bite them and they have no blood coagulation. How does that happen? They're in a different state of being. Their choice then transcends the old, and in that moment, their body literally is immune to the conditions in their environment, and they're literally living outside time. So then the woman who sees her baby caught under the car and flips the car over, she's not wondering, I wonder how heavy this car is and I didn't work out for the last 2 months. She's making a decision and her body's responding to a new mind. So then if a belief is an unconscious state of being, then in order for us to then make a change, let's just say your belief about something because of your past experience with relationships, we'll make this up. You have experiences in relationships, and those experiences have an amplitude of energy. In other words, the experience has a neurological imprint in the brain and an emotion that's conditioned in the body. And that's really your past. So then from that experience, you view your life from this experience. Well, in order for you to rewrite the program, the amplitude of choice has to be greater. The amplitude has to be greater than that experience. And if it is, and it rewrites the program neurologically and conditions the body emotionally, then the past no longer exists because the choice is an experience that you never forget. And the end product of an experience is an elevated emotion, and that's when the body begins to change.
So now what about the morphogenetic field portion of the story? Where does that come in?
Well, if you think about this, there are morphogenetic fields that have to do with everything,
yes.
Right? So there's a morphogenetic field that pharmaceuticals do this, and Prozac does that, and these injections help you here, and this is the treatment for chemotherapy. That's our present, what we have to offer, right?
Okay.
That's our greatest expression of health right now.
So is the morphogenetic field directly intertwined then with consciousness and belief systems?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So people then have a belief through their experience and through their conditioning that these elements are going to help them. And as a matter of fact, if they believe that they will, there's a greater chance that they will help them. And if the doctor, if she or he are sitting in the presence of them and tells them what it's going to do, and they have the right body language and the right presence, their belief in accepting that works even greater. So then the morphogenetic field of what's possible now. So if this is a huge morphogenetic field of pharmaceuticals, and now we're teaching people that they can actually change their state of being without relying on a sugar pill, without relying on a saline injection, that's a philosophical concept. But it doesn't have an imprint through experience, enough imprinting through experience in the quantum field. So then, if you're overcoming your anxiety and the person next to you is overcoming their MS, and then the person down the street is overcoming their chronic pain by changing their state of being, without any resources outside of them, without any drugs, without any surgeries, they're changing it just by changing their state of being. If enough of those people imprint that experience into the quantum field, because the experience literally begins to upscale the knowledge in the field.
Right.
In other words, it's an information field. So now you have access. So the more you do it and the more we have more people doing it, that community of experience begins to expand, and it becomes more accessible because it's more readily available.
So it's no longer just a vague theory. There's actually a plasma with intelligence of sorts, or whatever the
Beyond
field
space
is,
and time.
beyond space and time, that you can plug into as it's a healing ally.
Absolutely.
It's there to support your decision.
So think about this. So let's talk about it, because more than 50% of every person that's on their way to their first chemotherapy treatment, 50% or more, on their way to their first chemotherapy treatment, they get nauseous on their drive over to their first chemotherapy treatment because the doctor told them they were going to get nauseous. In other words, they selected a potential in the quantum field. They focused on that potential to the exclusion of everything else. They had the thought, that's clear intention, and they married that clear intention with the emotion of how they're going to feel. When you think and feel a certain way, you move into a state of being. And they knock their body out of balance just by thought alone. So if 50% of every person on their way to their first chemotherapy treatment gets sick on their drive over, 50% of the people in this culture can get well on their on their way to work. It's the same exact thing. It's just the expectation of either choosing in something wonderful happening or choosing in something terrible that happened. Now, in choosing the terrible, we always choose the known, right? We're always choosing we're choosing that known because it's based on our past. But I say, let's expect the unknown. Let's expect the unexpected. Let's choose a potential in the field that's an unknown, and it exists. It literally exists as a possibility.
So what happened to the field when Angelina Jolie made her decision to do what she did? Because that was a lot of info put into the field.
Listen, just because you carry a gene for a certain thing doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the condition.
It's going to express, yeah.
I mean, that's just premature choice. Now, if you have a fear that it's going to happen, well, then that may be the right choice. But gosh darn it, in our studies with spontaneous remissions and the people that have gone through our workshops, we've seen cancer disappear in a very short amount of time. It's becoming a morphogenic field. We've seen people with MS and lupus and celiac disease. It goes away.
Yes.
So if your genes turn on and off, they upregulate and they downregulate. If 1,561 genes can turn on in 8 weeks, from people that have been that do a simple relaxation yoga meditation, 20 minutes to 30 minutes, 1,561 genes, over 800 of them turn on, healthy genes turn on, and about 670 some turn off that are the stress-related genes. Then we know then that genes then are just on a moment-to-moment basis are changing. But if you're thinking the same way, you're choosing the same way, you're behaving the same way, you're experiencing the same thing.
And you're doing a hard buy-in that genetics indicate absolute illness in your future.
It's just not true.
It's not true.
It's just not the truth.
No. So there we go on that. Now, so if we're looking at ill health, then we're looking at patterns that have been, these are not random things that happen to the body. This has occurred mostly through your buy-in, as you say, on an emotional, mental, subconscious level to where you're now expressing something of a lower nature in the physical.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, because I want to answer it in two ways.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to sound like there's a panacea that I'm addressing. I want to talk about knowledge and information. So, for the most part, you know, if you look at the definition of genes, genes allow us to make proteins. So you have a gene that makes muscle cells make muscle proteins. They're called actin and myosin. Skin cells make skin proteins. They're called collagen and elastin. And stomach cells make stomach proteins, pepsin, et cetera, et cetera. So the body's a protein-producing machine. But in order for the body to make proteins for structure and function, the gene has to be expressed to make those proteins, right? So we express 1.5% of our genes. The other 98.5% is called junk DNA. As a matter of fact, if you took a skin cell and you stretched out all the genes of a skin cell, it would be 6 feet tall. If you took out all the genetic material out of your entire body and you stretched it out from end to end, it would go to the sun and back 150 times. If you took all the genetic material out of the 7 billion people on the planet and you scrunched it together, it would fit in a grain of rice. Now, genes are a parts list of potentials. They're libraries of possibilities. Out of the 1.5% of the genes that you express, you're 98% chimpanzee. You're only a few hundred genes away from a chimp. 70% rat. Some more than others, but roughly 70%. People don't understand that genes are not the answer to who they are. You have 100,000 proteins that in your body. You have 40,000 regulatory proteins that make those proteins. So then we should have 140,000 genes that make 140,000 proteins. The answer is we don't. We have 25,000 genes that make that many. So now we're talking about variations, combinations, sequences, and patterns. And when you look at this more closely, one gene can have 35,000 different variations.
Really?
So now we're talking about this whole phenomenon that's very nonlinear. So there are networks and components and communities of connections about how genes begin to express themselves. So when you confront or address adversity or difficulty in your life, if you're addressing that adversity and doing the same thing that creates the same experience produces the same emotion, and the same emotion signals the same gene in the same way. So if you're angry at your ex-husband, if you're judgmental of your coworker, if you're impatient in traffic every single day, then it's the same information coming from the environment chemically. Now, as the organisms in evolution, if there's a organism that's embracing cold conditions, or heat, or altitude, or current, or predator and prey, as the organism is exposed to those environmental conditions, they have to change their behaviors in order to survive. They have to adapt. So if they change their behaviors and they have a new experience should produce a new chemical expression. So now as the organism begins to embrace the environmental conditions, over a series of exposures to the same environmental conditions by changing their behaviors, the new experiences produce new chemical feedback from the environment that signals the gene. And if it's cold, the organism grows thicker fur. Fur is a protein. If it's altitude, hemoglobin bonds to oxygen more. That's a protein. If it's a current, the bigger tail fin. If it's predator and prey, longer legs. So the bodies begin to adapt to the environmental conditions. So then, if you're living by the same emotions every single day, you're keeping the same genes turned on and the other genes turned off, and you're headed for your genetic destiny. Now throw in those limited emotions of anger and survival and depression and hatred and judgment and unworthiness and guilt. Now you're dysregulating the gene, and now you're more matter and less energy. In other words, the body is becoming more dense, and if the denser the body becomes, the more we're subject to the laws of thermodynamics, which is matter tends to break down in time. Disorder, right? The second law of thermodynamics. Change your energy then. And now if you can really change the level of energy, that creates a level of coherence, and you begin to learn new knowledge, you begin to wire it in your brain, you demonstrate that knowledge, you create a new experience creates a new emotion, and now you're teaching your body emotionally what your mind has intellectually understood. You're embodying knowledge in that moment. You're signaling new genes in new ways.
So you're creating one of the 35,000 potential effects from that
another
one gene.
variation, thank God.
It's amazing. I mean, it is miraculous.
Now think
really.
about this. I mean, the latest research shows that our genes and our receptors on our cells are at least 100 times more sensitive to electromagnetism, to electricity,
Yes.
to energy, than they are than to chemistry. And that when you get the hair on the back of your neck standing up, and you feel empowered, and you feel enriched, and you feel, enthusiastic, boy, oh boy, the cells are getting new information in that moment. You've come out of your resting state, and you go from particle to wave. And when your heart opens, the field goes from a few inches around your body to 9 meters around your body. Now you're saying there's potentials in the quantum field that I want to tune into, but in order for you to do that, you have to emulate the divine.
You have laid a lovely foundation to now get into the subject of the placebo effect. A very thorough, lovely foundation. Yes, we do need to go there.
All right,
okay.
So
and I want to have some really good, juicy examples of the potential, startling examples of what can happen.
All right, so I love talking about this because it suggests possibility. I mean, there's a great story of a guy that in the mid-1900s, early 1900s, that went to his doctor. And they did all the exams on him, and they told him that he had end stage, 4th stage esophageal cancer, and that he had 6 months to live and to get his affairs in order. So the guy goes home, announces to his family that he's got end stage esophageal cancer, and he's got 6 months to live. His family starts treating him in certain ways that preparing him to die. Of course, in just a few days, over 6 months, he dies he dies. And so they do an autopsy on his body, and they find out he has no esophageal cancer. So if you think about that, he died by thought alone.
Yes.
He tuned into that possibility in the field, emotionally embraced what it would be like, lived as if, that's a state of being, and his body was drawn to that destiny. Okay? Now, you take another experiment where you take a group of patients that have Parkinson's disease, okay? And Parkinson's disease is a deficiency in dopamine. The brain can't make dopamine. And when there's not enough dopamine in the brain, there's involuntary tremors. In other words, there's a tremor or a pill rolling or what's called steppage gait or festination gait. The body, the upper motor neurons cause the body to go into spastic paralysis, right? So they did this experiment where they took people and they said, okay, listen, we got this really great hot new drug. And they pull out this big needle, and it's a saline injection. It's salt. And they say to them, look, okay, now, here we're going to give you this injection. And more than 50% of the people that got the injection, all of their involuntary tremors went away. In other words, disappeared. So now they were no longer having any imbalances physically in their body. So the doctors that did the experiment said, well, that's just a placebo effect. And then they said, well, what is the placebo? So what they did was they took a radioactive dye that competes with receptor sites in the brain for dopamine. So if the person is making their own dopamine and they inject the radioactive dye that goes into those receptor sites, when they photograph the brain, there should be no radioactive dye in the brain because dopamine is in there. Mm-hmm. If they're not making their own dopamine and they shoot the radioactive dye in there, you're going to see all the brain light up because it's competing, it's filling the receptor sites for dopamine. So when they did the test, they found out that those people were making their own dopamine. In other words, they moved into a new state of being. They got the injection. They thought that they were well. As they began to think that they were well, they began to act like they were well. The moment they were acting like they were well, they began to embrace what it would feel like to be well. And how you think and feel is a state of being. That's a belief. And in a matter of moments, they were being well. Now, the moment you're being something, the intelligence that gives you life, that's both within you and all around you, personal and universal, endorses who you're being. So the intelligence says, oh, he's being or she's being healthy. So now I have to make the internal chemistry to reflect the state of being. So they started making their own dopamine. Now here's the caveat. The caveat is that the results only lasted for a little time, like a day or so, maybe 2 days. And some people would say, why would that be? Because the moment the person returned back into their same present life, they saw their wife, they saw their husband, they saw the caregiver, they saw the bed, they played chess with the guys who complained about their conditions. The moment they got back into their environment, the environment was so strong that by association, just like Pavlov ringing the bell and salivating, the body physiologically returned back to the old state of being. Now here's the question. if meditation is about going from thinking to being, because that's what it's really about, you can't get up as the same person who sat down. You have to get up as somebody else. If that's what meditation is about, then could you move into a state of being, and instead of putting your belief into a sugar pill or a saline injection, because all they did was accept the potential, could you then put your attention into the unknown, to the possibility of the quantum field, and move into a state of being every day? And if it only lasts for a day, because that environment is that powerful, wouldn't it be a good idea then to get up every morning in a different state of being and create an elevated level of energy, to open your heart and experience goodwill and gratitude before the event, to be inspired and enthusiastic, and marry it with possibility, and get up from that state of being and then maintain that modified state of mind your entire day, so that the experience of your meditation turns into a good mood.
Yes.
Turns into a
Answer is
good,
yes.
good
That would be a good
temperament,
thing. Yes.
And then into a good personality trait. So then the question is, can you teach it?
Right. Can you teach it?
Do you need the sugar pill? Can you teach it?
Okay, so yeah, and let's talk about that, because what happens, I mean, we've all heard of the famous, in the past, the faith healers, the evangelists going around, and there would be these spontaneous healings, many of which were permanent with the people, because they had faith in that particular charismatic leader, God, whatever their form of faith was. They had faith in that above anything else, including above the field of medicine.
Sure.
So the faith was so deep that the remission was allowed to happen by faith alone. But if you go
What is your
beyond that,
definition of faith?
what is the definition of faith? Because we're taught to believe in everything other than ourselves. Must believe in the medical profession, the pharmaceutical.
Well, the current witch doctor is wearing a lab coat. And
Exactly.
stethoscope.
Exactly. That's the witch doctor,
So-
which we've been trained to believe in. So we have to have the faith to overcome and believe our own system is stronger,
So
right?
my definition of faith is
Yeah.
believing in thought more than anything else. And when you
Yes.
look, we all do this. You get in trouble in your
Yes.
life. You get into a crisis. Something goes wrong in your life. Everybody does the same thing. They retreat from their life. They don't want to see anybody. They don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to talk to anybody. They want to eliminate their environment and go into eliminate their body. They want to focus on a possibility in a quantum field. They want to begin to become aware of who they no longer want to be and who they do want to be.
Yes.
And that process, when you're injured or damaged or you're altered in some way, that dark night of the soul is because you're no longer feeling like yourself, because you're no longer yourself. And now that you're no longer yourself, you can see yourself for the first time.
But it takes trauma oftentimes to bring that state of...
That's the old model,
Yeah.
current conditions. So then when we get to that point where we're all of a sudden now becoming conscious of who we are then, and we're eliminating the environment, we're selecting the potential in the quantum field, and we're saying, this is what I'm intending on. And we obsess about that intention. We keep thinking, we're wired to do this. This is what we're wired to do. Now, you may say, well, what is that, prayer? I don't care what you call it, but when you believe in your internal paradigm, your internal vision, and you're making it more real than your external world, and you are emotionally embracing it, not just hoping, not just wanting, but you have to emotionally embrace the outcome. That's the element.
Yes.
You have to bring up the feeling before it's made manifest. You can't say, when my new lover comes, I'm going to be happy.
That's the missing part. Words don't do it.
Right, because you can't say, when I'm healed, I'll finally give thanks, or when my wealth shows up, then I'll be inspired about life. That's the Newtonian model of reality of cause and effect. The quantum model of reality says you have to teach your body emotionally what it feels like ahead of the actual event.
Yes.
You have to literally change the circuitry in your brain to look like the experience has happened, and you have to emotionally condition your body into giving it a taste of the future so that your body's physically changed. Now, if your brain and body are physically changed to look like the experience has happened, relax, because the experience has already happened and it's going to find you. And it's going to come in a way that you least expect. Now, why does it have to come in a way that you least expect? Because if you can expect it, it's nothing new. It's got to rock your world.
Absolutely.
It's got to catch you off guard. It has to leave no doubt that what you did inside of you produced some result outside of you. And when you can correlate the changes you've made inside of you with the effects that you produced outside of you, you'll pay attention to what you did and you'll do it again. That's called causing an effect. And that level of empowerment is what every human being is after. It's not the car, it's not the SUV, it's not the lover, it's not the vacation, it's the fact that you created it from your mind. And when you get a taste of that, then all of a sudden, the material things become incidental, because now you're going to want to experience the mystical. You're going to want to understand and unravel the mystery of who you really are. That's the excitement then, because you're no longer seduced by the shampoos and the cars and the beers and whatever else people think they need
And
to
every
have.
human being is capable, innately capable
I always
of doing
say
this.
nobody's so special to be excluded from the quantum law. Now, think about antiquity. Gender, race, color, social status, intellectual ability, religion has all disseminated and divided people. And in their ignorance, they think they have to go through someone to get there.
Right.
We come preloaded with all the biological and neurological machinery to do this. We are divine creators. That's who we are. And if you're waking up every day and getting out of bed and doing the same thing and going to the same place and seeing the same people at the exact same time, and then allowing the same people to push the same emotional buttons, and then it's your external environment. Your environment's controlling how you think and feel. You're a victim to your environment. The quantum model says change how you think and feel and see if you can put an effect in your environment. Now, when you get to this point, I don't care if you're the CEO of a major company or a prison inmate or the janitor in the school or the school teacher, everybody secretly believes in their greatness. They do. They secretly believe that they can do a better job in life. And when we get to that point of consciousness, becoming conscious, right? I don't care what paradigm you accept, but the bottom line is that there is some aspect of us at cause in our life. That's the new model of reality. And so when you truly are in a state of creation, guess what? You're not your face. You're not your body. You're not your identity. You're not your breasts. You're not a mother. You're not a wife. You're not your car. You're not your house. You're not living in this lifetime in linear time. In order to get to the field of possibility, you have to become pure consciousness. You have to become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. And when we dissociate from this present reality, we just walk through to the door to the quantum field. You can't enter as a somebody. You have to enter as a nobody. And that means then, by very nature, you have to become pure consciousness. And when you are, then you have dominion to change your body. Now you have the ability to create something in your life, in your environment, and you transcend or create another time. So it's kind of a paradox. Isn't it funny that in order for us to create a new life, we have to forget about our life?
Yeah, exactly.
We have to forget about all
so
who we are.
let's talk about the nuts and bolts of it. So you're looking at being able to access the no thing and no one aspect of self, the nonlinear, beyond space and time template that has the ability to create any outcome we want, really. And so let's talk about that within the context of healing and beyond the placebo effect, because now placebo effect should become a worn out term. Really, we do need to move beyond it. It's just the effect, not the placebo effect.
Well, how much time do we have?
We have about 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, this is interesting because when we start, look, after What the Bleep, the most common thing we heard was, how do you do it, So we started teaching these workshops around the world, and we were teaching people how to do it. And for 2 years, we really didn't produce much results. We didn't have a lot of results. And after 2 years, all of a sudden, the floodgates opened. We started getting emails. And of course, the very first line of every email that we got, and it's still the same to this day, is you're not going to believe this. That's the first line of every email. Hey, I gave up my anger and my acid reflux went away. Hey, I got this job. I'm making $40,000 more than I was last year. I'm traveling along the West Coast. I got all expenses. All of these amazing. I won the lottery. All of a sudden we started getting this floodgate of all these possibilities where people were manifesting realities. So we knew then that we were getting feedback that we were doing something right. So we started teaching more advanced workshops, and then this crazy thing happened. We started having people getting healed right during our workshops. MS, lupus, celiac disease, high blood pressure, chronic pain.
How could you quantify that at the time?
Well, they would stand up and say, oh my God, something shifted in me.
Yeah.
I'm eating hamburgers. I was living on lettuce for the last 7 years of my life. Hey, I've had chronic bladder pain for the last 15 years. I can't even take antibiotics any longer because I'm immune to them now. I have no bladder pain. I feel great, or hey,
Wow.
There's some shift, and then they send us the lab results, and of course we correlate it. So It was happening in real time. They were signaling new genes in new ways in the event. Their body was literally living in a future
So people
reality.
are saying to themselves, what were they teaching them?
Well, it was amazing because we now knew that the placebo was working, but the only thing is that there was no sugar or pill or bread pill or saline injection. They were believing in themselves, okay? So then what we said then was, look, if it's happening in real time, we got to measure this. And like we talked about last time, we brought in a team of neuroscientists, Jeffrey Fannin, we brought in Konstantin Korotkov, and I wanted measurements. And I wanted to know if we could see what was going on in real time. Look, it's one thing to say a person's better from Parkinson's disease, but let's see if in fact their brain is any
And
different.
last time we talked, you had conducted the experiments, but you were waiting for the data to come in. I think it was just due.
All right, well, let's
what
cut
is
through
the
some
data?
slides. Let's cut through some slides here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so what we did first and foremost is we measured the ambient energy in the room. We had a little over 200 participants in this advanced workshop. It was a 4-day workshop, and we said, okay, let's measure the electromagnetic field, let's measure the space of the room, and let's measure the energy in the room.
Konstantin's job.
So we measured the energy in the room, and it was roughly 2,800 joules or so, 3,800 joules. At the end of the 4-day workshop, it was over 5,200 joules. Now that is
It started out as what?
38, and it went up to 52.
Wow.
So we have a very, very substantial amount of energy, available energy, that's in that room. It was palpable by the 4th day. But we measured it, and now we know there's more energy, less matter in the room. We know that. So we talked to Konstantin about this, and he said, I have to present these results at my conference because this is one of the most dramatic changes that we've ever seen when it comes to measuring energy in the room. So we took people through the process of examining their past their first day. And when we studied them examining their past, their brain actually got worse. Because most people, when you look at your
because they're
past,
swimming in that soup.
and the energy in the room went down because they were calling energy back to the body.
Yeah.
So when I looked at the brain scans of people in the middle of their meditation, they were using their brain to try to change their brain. They were using the program to try to change the program. They were using the ego to try to change the ego, and their brain worked harder, and their brainwave patterns went up, and they got worse. But then when we started shifting to the present moment, and all of a sudden they were calling energy back, the energy room started to rise. By the 3rd day, during meditations, I watched the strip chart just raise, and this is the result of it. So people were exuding energy. Their body's energy went from very small to very large, and it was cluttering the room and creating a new morphogenic field. So there was a field that was created there. So we now know that that happened. Now, this is what a change in coherence looks like in the brain. If you look on the left side, this person has a lot of chatter going on in their brain. Their brain is working way too hard. They're thinking about everything. They're analyzing their life within the emotions that they're memorized. Their brain is in a high arousal state. After one meditation, we see a normal, healthy brain. As a matter of fact,
One looks agitated.
one is very agitated. So you got 2 parts of the brain, 2 halves of the brain communicating. That is a level of wholeness where the person is literally viewing their life from a different mind. Now, Konstantin's work allows us to measure the field around the body, but then the different energy centers. I don't like to call them chakras, but I call them energy centers because they're literally hormone centers that carry nerve plexuses or minds with them. They're levels of consciousness. So you can measure the person's level of chakra balance based on their size of expression, healthiness, robustness. And then the way we measure whether they're working properly is whether they're aligned or we move them off. So the weaker or more imbalanced they are, the more we move them off, the more they move off. So we do a meditation at the beginning of every day to bless every one of these centers with new information. At the end of one meditation, you have to get into your autonomic nervous system. You have to get beyond your analytical mind. You have to enter into the subconscious system to make the change. Here's a person whose energy is way off. After one meditation, their energy is more aligned, and you can see some of those energy centers actually enlarged. Take a look at this person. They're doing pretty good, but after the meditation, they're doing really well.
Yeah, now, this is amazing technology.
This is 45 minutes of one meditation. Now, look at the size of those energy centers compared pre and post. You can see they're just more robust, they're more filled, they're more heightened, and this person's going to have a good day. So that was a great way for us to measure. Like, in other words, you can't change these systems with your conscious mind. As consciousness falls out of the neocortex, you move deeper into the autonomic nervous system. You know, that fight or flight parasympathetic nervous system, that automatic nervous system that causes you to salivate when you see the chocolate cake. Well, if you're changing the program now, you're changing it in the autonomic nervous system, you won't salivate any longer because you changed it there. This is bliss in the brain. You can see right around the third level, the third row down there, second one over from the left, you see a brain that's bright red. That is energy making its way to the brain. This is being in the moment. You can see a person very hypocoherent in the first slide, and then in the second slide, their brain is way more organized and more balanced. Now, this woman had an amazing, amazing experience. We were watching her brain patterns during this event, and she was pretty much started her event in a certain level. Her meditation went, we were watching it during the event and during the meditation. Now, I want you to see what full-out ecstasy looks like in the brain. See how red that is? Yeah. That is energy. That's Kundalini. This woman was sobbing. She was in so much joy. And she wasn't doing it. It was happening to her. It was energy. All of that energy is, as the body, as the mind, is moving back to the brain. This person was in a state of absolute bliss, a state of absolute ecstasy. This is a person with a traumatic brain injury. All that blue means it's hypocoherent. He's struggling. The light bulb's at 10 watts instead of 50 watts. After 4 days of meditation, normal brain. Normal brain. He's wheelchair bound. At the end of this event, he stood up. Traumatic brain injury, same guy. Look at how blue it is in all those different segments. In other words, his brain's not getting enough energy. This is a normal brain after 4 days.
So what I'm seeing here then, if we were talking about earlier, what is faith? And accessing that faith in self. We've been taught to not have faith in ourselves, in our own potentials. But what you're showing us is actually, I think, a good hook for developing faith in what we're capable of, because the science is now supporting the faith.
Sure, absolutely.
It's beautiful.
And look at this. Look at this person with Parkinson's disease. This is a person, when you have Parkinson's disease, the brain is working way too hard. It's hypercoherent. The person has a lot of difficulty thinking clearly. The brain is way out of balance. After 4 days of meditation, this is a normal brain. Her tremors went away.
Now, interestingly, you showed us the woman whose brain was blissed out, bright red. You show us the really stressed out brain, bright red. What's the difference in...
Without going into too much detail.
Because it's a lot of energy.
No. In this particular mechanism, this particular graph, the red in this situation is measuring what's called coherence. So the redder it is in this slide means the more hypercoherent, the more static is going on in the brain. So the other brain scan, the quantitative measurement that we used is standard deviations of temperature. So here's the other measurement. So look how blue the brain is here, which means there's not a lot of activity going on.
Yes.
That is a normal brain right there.
Oh my God, okay, well.
No tremors. This person, without any drugs, without any surgery, without anything, in her belief in herself, changed her state of being.
We only have about 2 minutes left. So for you, and I think it might be redundant to even ask this question, but what is the most hopeful element of spiritual technology right now when we look at the incredible trouble people are in mass on a chronic disease level?
Yeah, someone's got to start telling the truth. That the number one reason for people living such physical imbalance is because of the hormones of stress. 75 to 90% of every person that walks into a healthcare facility is walking in because of a stress-related disorder. And the longer we live by stress, the more disease will become. And I don't care what drug, what surgery you do, until you take care of the cause of that problem, then, when Jesus healed his people, he said, sin no more. What he meant was change your attitude. I got a busy day today. I got a crucifixion coming up. I got a mother who's worried about me. I got 12 guys who have no idea what I'm talking about. If you don't change your attitude, I'm going to have to come back and do this again. So I think people have to realize that we're a cause of all of this and to start taking our power back. Instead of believing that everybody has the answers, start finding out for yourself the truth behind it and start making your own personal changes.
So it really has to be a committed practice to just take however much time we can each day to go in and create this new reality.
Even if you just spent a little bit of time doing that, you would see the effects. Be the scientist in your life. And never wait for science to give you permission to do the uncommon.
Exactly.
Do the uncommon and do it consistently, and then have science come and measure you and say, wow, we need to change our laws.
Yes, as always, and not just a pleasure, but very elucidating for all of us. And we're going to have another conversation. So we're going to continue our conversation by going deeper into the esoteric and speaking about our nonlinear selves, which we have talked about just a bit, and the pineal gland. You won't want to miss this conversation. Until next time, thank you for joining us here on Gaiam TV.